In Jedi teaching, the Force is understood through two core aspects, the living Force and the cosmic Force, sometimes called the unifying Force. This understanding forms the basis of how the Jedi follow the light side. The living Force is rooted in the present. It flows through all living things, through instinct, emotion, and awareness. Jedi who focus on it are guided by what they feel around them. Qui-Gon Jinn is the clearest example. He trusted the Force as it spoke in the moment, even when it meant challenging the Council. The cosmic Force speaks to the larger shape of events. It reveals long-term direction, visions, fate, and the movement of the galaxy over time. Jedi attuned to it tend to reflect, wait, and act only when they sense the Force pointing toward a broader purpose. The living Force rises from life in motion. When life ends, it returns to the cosmic Force. One leads into the other. Together, they create the flow Jedi try to understand and serve. Some Jedi act on instinct, others wait for signs. Neither is always right. The discipline lies in knowing which to trust and when. This balance has always been central to the Jedi approach to the light. The debate between Qui-Gon and the Council over Anakin wasn't only about the boy. It came down to how Jedi should read the Force and what it means to act in line with the light. The light side of the Force is grounded in discipline. Its core values, compassion, selflessness, and balance, guide how Jedi live and act. The Jedi Code expresses this clearly. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no passion, there is serenity. Jedi are trained to recognize emotion but not act on it. Anger and fear cloud judgment. The goal is to remain centered and clear-minded even under pressure. The same logic applies to attachment. Jedi can care deeply, but they're taught not to hold on. Fear of loss leads to possessiveness, and that fear is often the first step toward the dark side. Yoda warned that the dark side is quicker and easier, but not stronger. The light side requires patience and clarity. Its true strength lies in restraint. That restraint extends to how Jedi use the Force. It's not for control or dominance. It's used to protect, heal, and to understand. Violence is always the last option, and even then, it must be measured. Jedi don't strike in anger. They fight to restore peace, not for victory. Some Force traditions, like the Fallanassi, reject violence completely. They avoid confrontation through illusion and invisibility. The Jedi don't go that far, but they share the belief that power should never come from cruelty or vengeance. A Jedi acts when needed, but never out of rage and never to serve themselves. This code of conduct has shaped every light-aligned order in the galaxy. Their customs may differ, but they all share the same goal: to protect life and maintain balance, guided by the Force, not ambition.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Dai Bendu. Before the Jedi Order, one of the earliest known Force traditions emerged in the Andobi Mountains of Ando Prime. The Dai Bendu were monastic scholars active long before 36,000 BBY. They lived in isolation and focused on meditation and the quiet study of the Force. Their daily practice included breath count exercises and written observations of life energy, including early notes on midichlorians. They weren't concerned with power or training warriors. Their goal was understanding, achieved through silence, repetition, and discipline. The Dai Bendu believed that insight came from stillness. They taught that listening and waiting were essential parts of sensing the Force, and that clarity followed patience, not impulse. These ideas would influence light side traditions long after the Bendu faded from memory. In 36,453 BBY, one of the Thoyor ships arrived on Ando Prime. It brought a group of Bendu monks to Tython, where they joined other Force-sensitive pilgrims. That gathering laid the foundation for what would become the Jedi Order. Elements of Bendu culture carried forward. Their numerological symbols were carved into the early temples on Tython and later evolved into the crest of the Jedi Order. Though the Bendu monks themselves were largely forgotten by the time of the Clone Wars, their influence remained. In canon, a monastery linked to them still existed on Kijimi in the last millennium of the Republic, and in Star Wars Rebels, a neutral force being known as the Bendu appeared, named in reference to the same tradition and echoing its principle of balance between extremes. Only a few names from this era survive. One of them is Ketu, a monk who documented the journey from Ando Prime to Tython. His writings provide one of the earliest glimpses into the mindset that would shape the light side path for generations. The Jedi Order. The Jedi Order was the first organized tradition of Force users. Formed on Tython around 36,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, it brought together many pilgrims from across the galaxy. Many descended from monastic groups like the Dai Bendu. Their teachings set the groundwork for what would later become the Jedi, though their approach was based on balance, not allegiance. The Jedi believed the Force moved through two aspects, Ashla and Bogan, light and dark. Both were seen as natural, neither was labeled as good or evil. The central goal was equilibrium. To preserve that balance, the Order took direct action. Those who leaned too far toward either side were sent to one of Tython's moons, Ashla or Bogan, for solitude and reflection. After regaining clarity, they returned to the Order. The Jedi built 9 temples, each devoted to a different aspect of Force study, combat, healing, science, and more. Their leadership came from a council of temple masters, including names like Arajavari and Garonjad. Jedi Rangers such as Lannery Brock served as peacekeepers across Tython. For millennia, the system held, but when the Infinite Empire arrived, bringing dark side power on a scale the Jedi had never faced, their balance broke. The Force Wars that followed devastated Tython. By 25,783 BBY, the Jedi Order was gone. Those who remained loyal to Ashla founded a new tradition, the Jedi Order. From that point forward, the dark side wasn't treated as a natural force, it was forbidden. The Jedi left Tython and devoted themselves fully to the light. The Jedi still exist today in legend stories, especially Dawn of the Jedi. In canon, only fragments remain. Tython has reappeared, but the Order has not. For now, their legacy is a record of time when balance stood at the center of the Force. The Jedi Order. After the Force Wars, the survivors of the Jedi cast aside balance. Those who followed Ashla, the light, founded a new tradition, and in around 25,000 BBY, the Jedi Order began. Unlike their predecessors, the Jedi didn't treat light and dark as equal parts to be balanced. The Order aligned itself fully with the light and built its teachings around control, clarity, and discipline. The Jedi Code formalized this worldview. It was passed down through a series of short maxims. There is no emotion, there is peace. There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force. These principles shaped the Jedi way of life. Anger, fear, and desire were seen as threats to balance. Attachment, especially, was discouraged. Not because Jedi weren't allowed to care, but because possessive love or fear of loss could lead to reckless action. A Jedi was expected to serve the galaxy, not personal bonds. To maintain these ideals, the Order became monastic. Force-sensitive children were brought into the temple at a young age. They were trained from initiate to Padawan under the guidance of a single master. Progression through the ranks, knight, master, and in rare cases, council, was based on experience and discipline, not power. Lightsabers became their symbol, not as weapons of conquest, but as tools for protection. Jedi were taught to fight only when necessary and only in defense. When the Order intervened, it did so to prevent conflict, not to win it. The Jedi were advisors, scholars, and diplomats as much as warriors. They placed duty above self, and their greatest threat wasn't an enemy, but their own emotions. Over time, this structure solidified. The Jedi became the guardians of peace for the Republic, and as the Order expanded, so too did the range of interpretation with it. But these debates would come later. In its early centuries, the Jedi stood as a unified body, shaped by structure, guided by the Code, and devoted fully to the light. The Living Force. Qui-Gon Jinn followed the living force, the presence of energy in all living things felt in real time. While others focused on the future, he paid attention to what was happening right in front of him. He made decisions based on instinct, not calculation, and acted when he believed the Force was pointing him in a clear direction. This was how he recognized something in Anakin Skywalker that others overlooked. Not because of a vision or prophecy, but because something in the boy's presence stood out, and Qui-Gon didn't ignore it. He respected the Jedi Code, but he didn't let it override the Force itself. He questioned rules that didn't fit the moment. In Legends, and in Master and Apprentice, he's portrayed as more open to attachment and more willing to trust emotion when it revealed something real. He also explored beyond temple teachings. According to the Clone Wars, he began researching how consciousness might persist after death. That path would eventually lead Yoda to ancient Force priestesses who would teach him how to complete what Qui-Gon had started. Others followed similar lines of thought. Rael Averross questioned the same boundaries. Anakin, raised under stricter instruction, carried his own emotional sensitivity, and Obi-Wan, shaped by both the Order and his master, tried to balance both philosophies. Qui-Gon's fighting style matched his worldview. Legends identifies it as Form 4, Ataru, a fast, reactive form tied to movement and flow. His legacy endured long after his death. Yoda took up his study, Obi-Wan kept his lessons alive, and even the Jedi Order, bound by centuries of structure, was reminded that listening to the Force sometimes means questioning the system meant to interpret it. The Corellian Jedi. While the Jedi Order promoted consistency across its ranks, some Jedi followed distinct local traditions. In Legends, the Corellian Jedi, based in the Corellia system, were among the most independent-minded enclaves in the galaxy. Known for their practical approach and green-trimmed robes, they became informally known as the Green Jedi. Though still part of the Jedi Order, the Corellian Enclave operated with unusual autonomy. From their base in Coronet City, they often worked directly with Corellian authorities, particularly on local matters. This regional loyalty occasionally created friction with the Jedi High Council, which prioritized neutrality above all. The Corellian Jedi also departed from Jedi orthodoxy in personal ways. Unlike the mainstream order, they permitted marriage and family life. Indeed, many came from Force-sensitive lineages, such as the Halcyon and Horn families, serving the order across generations. This continuity was seen by many as a source of strength. They trained with a focus on practical skills. Corellian Jedi were often known as pilots, investigators, and local peacekeepers. Their philosophy emphasized results over ritual, and they developed customs unique to their enclave, such as awarding Jedi credits to honor achievement. At times, the differences between the Corellian Enclave and the wider order led to friction. In one Legends account, a minor schism occurred centuries before the Clone Wars when some Corellian Jedi withdrew from galactic assignments to focus on local service. While the Council never formally severed ties, it remained wary of their autonomy. Still, the Corellian Jedi took part in major conflicts. During the new Sith Wars around 1000 BBY, they fought under Lord Hoth in the Army of Light. Afterward, disillusioned by the war, many again returned to Corellia and resumed their traditional roles. By the Clone Wars, a few had reintegrated with the larger order. Jedi Master Neja Halcyon, who secretly married and had a child, served during the conflict. His grandson, Corran Horn, would later train under Luke Skywalker in the new Jedi Order era, continuing the Corellian Jedi legacy. The Corellian Jedi haven't been referenced in modern canon, and no canon material has confirmed their existence. While their story remains part of the Legends continuity, it offers a compelling model of what Jedi life could look like when personal identity and duty to the light walk side by side. The Barash Vow. The Barash Vow was a formal practice within the Jedi Order, an oath of silence and withdrawal. Jedi who took the vow stepped back from all assignments and severed contact with the Order. No missions, no communication, and complete isolation. It wasn't exile and it wasn't punishment. The vow was taken by choice, usually after a failure or crisis of purpose. Some Jedi believed they were no longer fit to serve. Others needed distance to restore focus. The intent was the same, to regain clarity through solitude and reflection. There was no set duration. Some Jedi stayed on Barash for years, a few decades. They returned only when they believed their connection to the Force had been restored. Kirak Infala is the clearest example. He had taken the vow before the Clone Wars. When Vader found him, he was living in solitude, still training, still meditating, but completely cut off. Infala explained that he would act only when his role as a Jedi was clear again. The vow appears as early as the High Republic era. It was named after Jedi Master Barash Sylvain, who originated the practice around 382 BBY. Jedi like Master Torbin and Des Rydan both stepped away after failures, not to hide but to acknowledge that continued service required a clear head. Though the Barash Vow is canon-specific, older Legends material describes similar forms of retreat, Jedi who left to wander, meditate, or reflect alone. The difference with Barash is that it was formalized, known, and recognized within the Order as a necessary pause. In a tradition defined by action, the vow served as a check. Jedi were trained to act when the Force guided them, not when their judgment was clouded. The Barash Vow made space for that correction. The Wayseekers. During the High Republic era, the Jedi Order recognized a rare path, the Wayseeker. These were Jedi Knights who stepped away from the Council's oversight to follow the Force on their own terms. Unlike those who took the Barash Vow, Wayseekers remained active in the galaxy. They accepted no missions, answered to no masters, and sought no approval. Their only guide was the Force itself. The High Republic Jedi, more spiritually flexible than later generations, allowed this role. The Council understood that not every calling could be mapped by traditional hierarchy. Orla Jareni was the best-known Wayseeker. She left the temple to walk her own path, traveling the galaxy alone, choosing her own purpose, and trusting the Force to show her the way. Others followed different routes. One Wayseeker became a folk singer, another aided local uprisings. These weren't typical Jedi assignments, and they weren't to be. The Wayseeker tradition existed for Jedi whose connection to the Force didn't fit the structure of the Order. Some, like Gela Natai, actively pursued the title. Obi-Wan Kenobi, as a Padawan, read about them in the temple archives and once reflected that Qui-Gon Jinn would have belonged among them. By the time of the Clone Wars, the role was essentially gone. The Jedi had grown rigid, less open to personal insight, more bound by central command. The freedom to walk one's own path quietly disappeared. The Wayseekers show what the Order once accepted, that loyalty to the light didn't have to mean loyalty to the Council. Grey Jedi. In Legends, Grey Jedi referred to Force users who operated outside Jedi orthodoxy but didn't embrace the dark side. Some were former Jedi, others never joined the Order at all. What connected them was a shared refusal to follow strict doctrine. They questioned the Jedi Council's bans on attachment, emotion, or certain techniques. Some formed families, others studied abilities usually avoided by the Order. What mattered to them wasn't the rule, but rather the intent. They believed the Force could be used responsibly without absolute restriction. Dai Bendu from Knights of the Old Republic is a well-known example. He left the Order after a disagreement, but never turned dark. He kept to himself, helped others when he chose, and relied on his own sense of right and wrong. The Jedi Council viewed paths like these as dangerous. Many who tried them failed, either losing control or drifting into the dark side. But not all did. Some managed to maintain discipline without depending on the Jedi's hierarchy. Canon hasn't officially used the term Grey Jedi, but some characters reflect the idea. Ahsoka Tano, after leaving the Jedi, continued to fight for peace. Wayseekers in the High Republic followed the Force without orders. The Bendu, a neutral Force-sensitive being, represented balance without allegiance. The Grey Jedi weren't a group and they didn't organize or follow a shared path, but their presence in lore asks a question the Jedi often avoided. Can the Force be followed without the Order? For some, the answer was yes. Guardians of the Whills. Throughout the galaxy, not all Force traditions followed Jedi doctrine. Some developed independently, small, disciplined groups that blended martial skill with spiritual purpose. They followed the light, but answered to no council. On the moon of Jeddah, the Guardians of the Whills served as protectors of the Temple of the Kyber. They had no lightsabers and they weren't trained in Jedi forms, but they held on to a deep belief in the Force, which they referred to as the Whills. Their daily practice was built around repetition, prayer, and quiet service. One line guided them: "I am one with the Force, and the Force is with me." They escorted pilgrims and safeguarded the temple grounds. Most weren't combatants, and when they fought, it was with simple weapons like staves, bows, and discipline. Chirrut Imwe, one of their most recognized members, was blind, but he could read movement and sense intention. His awareness came not from training, but from a lifetime of devotion. The Guardians didn't take sides in war. They had no role in Republic politics or Jedi operations. Their duty was to Jedha, to the temple, and to the sanctity of the Force as they understood it. While their path was narrow, it did endure, not through influence or power, but through sheer conviction. Kilian Rangers. Far from Coruscant, in the remote wild space system of Kilia 4, the Kilian Rangers upheld an older kind of order. They were Force-sensitive knights who served as sworn protectors to their local nobility, an honor-bound tradition more feudal than monistic. Their duty was regional, their code was chivalric, and their loyalty was to the people of their world. Rangers trained with Siang lances and shield gauntlets, specialized weapons designed to block blaster fire through focused Force use. Their numbers were small, sometimes no more than 5 at a time, but their role carried weight. They were guardians, judges, and enforcers of justice in their domain. Unlike the Jedi, Kilian Rangers allowed family lines to continue. Marriage and inheritance were part of this system. A Force-sensitive child born to a Ranger often trained to succeed their parent. This generational structure gave rise to the Kilian Lords, a noble caste of warrior adepts who saw their service not as detachment but legacy. Their code emphasized loyalty, justice, and defense of the weak, but the system wasn't immune to corruption. A splinter group known as the Renegades abandoned the Rangers' oaths and embraced the dark side, becoming enforcers of domination rather than protection. Even so, the core tradition endured. While the Kilian Rangers never spread beyond their system, they stood in the light all the same, through duty, discipline, and through belief that the Force was a responsibility and not a right. The Iron Knights. Among the most unorthodox Force traditions in galactic history were the Iron Knights, a group of Jedi who weren't organic beings at all, but sentient crystals known as shards. Discovered on the planet Orax, these shards were naturally Force-sensitive, but had no bodies of their own. Under the guidance of Jedi Master Akinos, a select few were placed into custom-built droid shells, giving them the mobility needed to train and serve as Jedi. This unconventional path challenged Jedi norms. The Council had long viewed droids as tools, not life forms. The idea of inorganic Jedi, beings with no biology, was deeply controversial. Fearing the precedent it might set, the Council excommunicated Akinos and his shard students. Still, the Iron Knights continued their training independently, holding to the Jedi Code despite being cast out. They proved themselves during conflicts like the Arcanian Revolution around 50 BBY, fighting alongside others to defend civilians. When Palpatine issued Order 66, many of the Iron Knights survived by disappearing to the remote world of Dweem, away from the Empire's reach. Years later, Luke Skywalker welcomed them into his reformed Jedi Order. He saw them not as anomalies, but as evidence that the Force could speak through any life form, even one made of crystal and steel. The Iron Knights stood apart in every sense. They had no faces, no voices, and no homeworld of their own. But through discipline, courage, and loyalty to the light, they proved that the Force isn't bound by biology. It moves through consciousness. And consciousness, as they showed, comes in more forms than most Jedi ever imagined. Matukai Adepts. The Matukai were a small, scattered Force tradition that placed physical training at the center of their practice. They believed strength in the Force came through discipline of the body, through movement, breath, control, and martial focus. Emerging during the Old Republic era, Matukai Adepts trained with the One Shen, a long electro staff used in close combat. Their abilities included enhanced strength, reflexes, and healing, developed not through meditation, but through repetition and effort. Most Matukai trained in isolation or in small groups, traveling from world to world as wandering monks. Their path was austere. They rejected luxury, avoided entanglement in galactic politics, and focused on bodily mastery as a means of tuning themselves to the Force. Jedi who encountered them, including Master Thame Cerulean, found them skilled and serious, unorthodox in method, but firmly committed to using their abilities responsibly. The Matukai remained few in number, but their approach to the Force endured. Strict training, sharp focus, and the belief that balance begins with control over oneself. Wardens of the Sky. The Wardens of the Sky were a decentralized group of Force users who emerged in the wake of the Great Hyperspace War. Unlike Jedi or Temple-based orders, they operated entirely within the lanes of hyperspace, patrolling routes, protecting travelers, and keeping trade corridors clear of raiders, slavers, and criminal syndicates. They didn't wear robes or wield lightsabers. Many posed as freelance scouts, starship crew, or independent pilots. But behind their ordinary roles, they relied on the Force to anticipate danger, sense intent, and act when needed. Their approach was informal and their presence often went unnoticed, but where safe passage was threatened, Wardens intervened. They believed freedom of movement was essential, something worth defending without asking permission. Because of this, they never built temples or reported to any central authority. Each Warden acted on their own, guided by instinct and responsibility. When one found a potential successor, usually a Force-sensitive encountered by chance, they would train them personally. At most, a Warden might have a single apprentice in their lifetime. The tradition was sparse and self-sustaining. Few records survive, and the Wardens left little trace in galactic history. But references in later Jedi texts place them as a quite enduring presence, especially in sectors with high pirate activity or political instability. They weren't warriors in the traditional sense. Their work was built on vigilance and quick judgment, catching trouble before it started. The Wardens of the Sky never grew into a formal order, but in their own way, they upheld the same ideal, using the Force not to rule or to conquer, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The Zeison Sha. The Zeison Sha were a survivalist Force tradition native to the moon Yanabar. They descended from Jedi survivors who had been stranded there after the New Sith Wars around 1000 BBY. With no way to return to the Jedi Order, those who remained built their own path, one shaped by the harsh environment and by the need to adapt without outside help. Their training focused heavily on telekinesis, and their signature weapon, the disc blade, was a sharp, circular projectile thrown and guided mid-air using the Force. Fast, precise, and deadly, it reflected their emphasis on control, accuracy, and efficiency. Unlike lightsabers, the disc blade required constant concentration and mastery over motion, fitting for a people who relied on self-reliance. The Zeison Sha rejected the Jedi ban on attachment. Family ties were central to their survival, and they saw no reason to abandon them. Children were raised by their parents, not given to temples. Bonds between generations were seen as a source of strength, not weakness. That independence shaped their view of the wider galaxy. They were wary of Jedi authority, especially any suggestion that their way of life was misguided or dangerous, but their values remained closely aligned with the light, protection of others, discipline, and the ethical use of power. When Luke Skywalker eventually made contact with them, he recognized not a threat, but a parallel, another group who had found a way to follow the Force without relying on Jedi tradition. Though small in number and isolated, the Zeison Sha maintained a strong sense of identity. Their resilience and clarity of purpose kept them intact long after the wars that had left them cut off from the rest of the galaxy. The Fallanassi. Some Force traditions didn't raise warriors or field generals. Some were of the more mystic variety, orders that valued clarity over confrontation. The Fallanassi were one of the most withdrawn among them. Introduced in legends, the Fallanassi were an all-female group known for their strict pacifism. They took no part in war, avoided violence entirely, and refused to use the Force as a tool for control. Instead, they trained in deep meditative techniques focused on concealment and illusion. Their method, called the White Current, allowed them to become invisible, mask entire settlements, and mislead even the most focused minds. Unlike Jedi, they didn't engage with the galaxy's politics or conflicts. When the Empire expanded, the Fallanassi survived by vanishing. Some communities remained hidden for years, protected not by shields or weapons but by misdirection. One of their members, Akana Norand, taught Luke Skywalker elements of their practice during the Black Fleet crisis. While he didn't adopt their beliefs fully, the experience shifted his understanding of what the Force could be. It added another layer to his training, one rooted in restraint and perception rather than action. The Fallanassi lived apart from Jedi orthodoxy, but their values remained close to the light. They show how the Force was studied and honored even in places where the Jedi held no reach, by those who saw defense not as confrontation, but as the choice to remain unseen. The Baran Do Sages. On the storm-covered world of Dorin, the Kel Dor developed their own Force tradition, the Baran Do. Long before the Jedi made contact, these sages served their communities by predicting natural disasters and offering advice to local leaders. They trained in solitude, focusing on clarity, foresight, and weather sense, not combat. Through extended meditation, some developed limited precognition. Over generations, their role became one of guidance, quiet, consistent, and rooted in service. But as Jedi teachings spread and Kel Dor students began joining the Order, the Baran Do faded from public life. Their influence declined without resistance or conflict. During the rise of the Empire, what remained of the Baran Do went into hiding. Their most committed members practiced a rite called the Dying Ceremony, slowing their bodily functions to feign death and retreat into hidden caverns beneath Dorin. There, they continued training in secret. Luke Skywalker later rediscovered them during the events of Fate of the Jedi, where he met Master Koro Zil, one of the sages who had preserved their ways through decades of concealment. The Baran Do offered a tradition built on patience and observation. They didn't intervene in conflict, but when possible, they warned others before it arrived. The Aing-Tii Monks. Deep in the Cathol Rift, the Aing-Tii Monks followed a Force philosophy unlike any other. Their view doesn't center on light or dark, balance or conflict. Instead, they describe the Force as a spectrum, a range of expressions as varied as color itself, with each being connecting to it differently and no single path being considered superior. The Aing-Tii are a reclusive alien species, rarely seen and even less understood, but their abilities are among the most advanced in the galaxy. They can fold space to teleport across vast distances and practice flow walking, a technique that lets them observe moments in the past or future. These abilities reflect their unique Force practices, developed without reference to Jedi or Sith teachings. They lived aboard massive organic ships, drifting through the rift in meditation and study. Their society is closed to outsiders, though they have made exceptions, especially when hunting slavers, a mission they treat as sacred. During the Fate of the Jedi era, Luke and Ben Skywalker trained briefly with them. Their guide, Tadar Ro, shared pieces of their philosophy, strange, ancient, and free from the Jedi-Sith divide. The Aing-Tii don't seek allies and they don't follow hierarchies, but their actions, their discipline, and their ethics place them firmly among the galaxy's light-aligned traditions. They offer a reminder that the Force doesn't come in one form. It speaks differently to every species, and sometimes it resists classification entirely. The Jal Shey. The Jal Shey were a quiet Force tradition, less interested in mysticism, more focused on study and diplomacy. They approached the Force through philosophy and ethics, not visions or warfare. They rarely carried weapons. Instead, they crafted Force-imbued garments, robes, belts, armor, designed to support focus and protect the mind. Their strength wasn't speed or power, but clarity. Jal Shey Adepts served as neutral advisors, often brought in to mediate political disputes or navigate ideological rifts. They didn't speak in terms of light or dark. Their concern was how the Force was applied in practice. They emphasized outcomes and avoided rigid doctrine. This placed them at odds with both Jedi orthodoxy and Sith absolutism, but close to the light in method and intent. The Order was small and selective. They avoided conflict, maintained independence, and remained largely unknown to the wider galaxy. When the Empire rose, many Jal Shey vanished, their teachings scattered, but traces of their work remained. Their artifacts still turn up in distant markets and forgotten archives, evidence of a tradition that followed the Force by thinking through it rather than fighting with it. The Shapers of Kro Var. The Shapers of Kro Var are a Force tradition rooted in isolation, survival, and elemental control. Originating on the remote world of Kro Var, they developed techniques for manipulating fire, water, earth, and air, skills passed down through shamanic ritual rather than formal training. They channel the Force into these elemental techniques, shaping the environment through fire bursts, wind gusts, moving stone, or rushing water. A fire shaper might hurl flame. An air shaper might deflect attacks with sudden gusts. These abilities are direct, physical, and tied to the world around them. They live in small clans, scattered across the world. Most are wary of outsiders, and their aggressive style has led others, like the Night Sisters or Jedi historians, to classify them as dark side users. But the Shapers don't follow the light or dark distinction. They serve no higher philosophy, and their loyalty is to clan, land, and the old rites passed down over generations. Some have fallen into violence, while others remain focused only on protecting their territory. Few leave their homeworld, and fewer still interact with the wider galaxy. But they're a reminder that Force traditions didn't all grow from temples or councils. Some came from the dirt, the wind, and the fire, and they endure on the edge of the galactic map. The Church of the Force. Not every follower of the light was a Jedi. Some had no Force sensitivity at all, but they still chose to live by its ideals. The Church of the Force was one such movement. It emerged during the rise of the Empire when the Jedi were declared traitors and nearly wiped out. With the Order gone, small communities quietly stepped in to preserve what they could. The Church didn't train warriors or teach Force techniques. It kept the memory alive. Members of the Church believed the Jedi had served a higher purpose, protecting balance, justice, and peace. They honored those values through ritual, story, and careful preservation of relics. Most lived far from the core worlds in places the Empire considered too remote to matter. One enclave formed on Jakku, led by Law's son Tekka. He wasn't a Jedi, but he'd traveled widely, collected forgotten texts, and helped hide Jedi artifacts. Decades later, when the Resistance needed to find Luke Skywalker, it was Tekka who held the map. The Church of the Force wasn't large and it had no formal doctrine, but its presence mattered. In the absence of the Jedi, it carried the light forward. The Disciples of the Whills. Among the many spiritual groups tied to the Force, the Disciples of the Whills held a unique role. Centered on the sacred world of Jedha, they were part of a broader religious tradition that treated the Force as divine, referred to not as energy or presence, but as the Whills. The Disciples weren't warriors. That role belonged to the Guardians of the Whills, who we mentioned earlier, who defended the holy sites. The Disciples focused instead on worship and service. They maintained the Temple of the Kyber, preserved ancient texts, welcomed pilgrims, and supported Jedha's spiritual life in day-to-day ways. It's reasonable to infer their duties ranged from tending shrines to possibly leading ceremonies that honored the Force's connection to life, death, and destiny, although no canon source lays out these rituals in detail. Members of the sect came from across the galaxy. Jedha's status as a pilgrimage site meant the Disciples were never a single culture or species, but a community built around a shared belief. Some settled permanently in Jedha City. Others came for a season or a single ritual before returning to their homeworlds, carrying pieces of the tradition with them. When the Empire tested its superweapon on Jedha, the Disciples suffered massive losses. The temple was destroyed and much of their community vanished with it. Some may have survived, and though scattered, it's plausible they continued practicing in quiet, keeping aspects of their rituals alive in hidden places far from the centers of power. The Potentium Heresy. Of all the Force philosophies to emerge within Jedi ranks, none stirred more controversy than the Potentium. Its core belief was simple and deeply at odds with Jedi teaching. The Potentium held that the Force itself was purely light. Darkness, they argued, didn't come from the Force. It came from those who misused it. Even abilities traditionally labeled dark, like Force lightning or aggressive emotions, could be used without falling, so long as the user's intent remained good. The movement began around 132 years before the Battle of Yavin, led by the Jedi Lior Hull. His followers believed that denying emotion outright only made it more dangerous, that morality should be judged by action, not dogma. But the Jedi Council disagreed. To them, the Potentium blurred the boundary between discipline and self-justification. They saw it not as a new philosophy, but as a path to rationalizing power. The sect was expelled. Over time, many of its followers did indeed fall. Without a firm stance against the dark side, some overstepped and proved the Council's fears valid. Still, the Potentium didn't vanish entirely. Its ideas resurfaced centuries later in the New Jedi Order era, when the former Jedi Vergir passed its teachings to Zeison Solo. She taught him that the Force was unified, that there was no light or dark, only the user's choices. That belief became the first step toward Jacen's transformation into Darth Caedus. To the Jedi, the Potentium remains a cautionary tale, not about power, but about certainty. That believing too strongly in one's own purity can blind even the well-intentioned, and that light, without humility, can be lost. The Jensaarai. The Jensaarai emerged in the final years of the Republic, a fusion of Jedi teachings and Sith techniques born not from rebellion but from reassembly. Their founder, Nikos Tyrus, was a former Jedi who had studied Sith lore. He believed that truth lay in both paths, not in choosing sides but in combining strengths. From that idea, the Jensaarai were formed, a small order that valued emotion and discipline, passion and purpose. They trained in defensive combat but made use of aggressive abilities when needed. To them, intent mattered more than method. They wore personalized armor, shaped like animals, and forged through the Force, each suit a reflection of the warrior inside it. At first, the Jensaarai was seen as dangerous. They clashed with Jedi remnants who saw their philosophy as unstable and occasionally resisted Sith Inquisitors. But over time, their path shifted. During Luke Skywalker's era, he and Corran Horn encountered the Jensaarai and helped guide them fully toward the light. They became guardians of their home sector, independent but aligned with the New Republic. Their story remains one of transformation, a reminder that even a tradition shaped by conflict can choose a future built on protection, not power. The Luka Sene. On the Mirror Luka homeworld of Alpharides, Force sensitivity wasn't rare, it was the norm. Every member of the species was born blind, relying entirely on the Force to perceive the world around them. To help guide this natural ability, the Mirror Luka developed the Luka Sene, an academic and cultural institution that taught individuals how to control and responsibly apply their Force perception. The Luka Sene wasn't a military order. It didn't send guardians or diplomats into the wider galaxy. Its purpose was local, focused on education, ethics, and community well-being. Students were trained in sensory control, emotional regulation, and philosophical study. The goal wasn't to prepare them for war or politics, but to ensure that their abilities didn't disrupt the society they lived in. Some Mirror Luka eventually joined the Jedi Order, but the Luka Sene itself remained independent. It had no formal ties to the Republic or the Jedi Council. It functioned entirely within Mirror Lukan culture, which was quiet, stable, and uninterested in external influence. The Luka Sene stood apart from most other Force traditions. It simply existed to maintain a way of life. The Ysanna of Ossus. On the scorched world of Ossus, a forgotten people kept the light alive. The Ysanna were the descendants of Jedi survivors who remained behind after the destruction of the Jedi Library, thousands of years before the Galactic Civil War. Cut off from the galaxy, they built a tribal culture rooted in oral tradition, Force rituals, and survival. They lived among the ruins, wielding the Force in raw, instinctive ways. Their warriors used telekinesis to guide projectiles, stones, arrows, and simple weapons toward their enemies with precision. They guarded sacred sites, passed down stories of the Sky People who once brought wisdom to the stars, and treated Jedi relics as sacred artifacts. When Luke Skywalker encountered them during the Dark Empire era, he quickly recognized the depth of their connection to the Force. To him, their abilities and worldview weren't primitive, but preserved. Two Ysanna, Jem and Rafe, left with him and fought alongside the New Republic against the Reborn Emperor. Though untrained by temple standards, they were still guided by the light. The Ysanna are one of the clearest examples of how Jedi heritage can survive without an order. Without doctrine or archives, they carried forward Jedi values through culture, memory, and instinct. Luke Skywalker's Jedi. After the fall of the Empire, there was no Jedi Order, only Luke Skywalker alone. No council, no temple, just a survivor with a promise to keep. He didn't try to resurrect what the Jedi had been, he simply started over. By 25 ABY, that meant the Jedi Praxium on Yavin 4. Luke's academy welcomed adults, pilots, soldiers, teachers, people who had lived through war. Luke permitted what the old order forbade: relationships, family, emotional bonds. He himself married Mara Jade. Other Jedi raised children, and they were expected to manage their emotions and not to erase them. Jedi still trained with lightsabers and still acted as defenders and diplomats, but they also worked within the galaxy, serving in militaries, governments, and local communities. There were failures, however. Kip Duron, one of the first students, fell to the dark side but later returned. Others experimented with ideas the old council would have rejected, but Luke responded by listening, both to the past and to the voices beyond the temple walls. He studied the ways of the Aing-Tii, the Baran Do, and others who used the Force differently. When the Yuuzhan Vong War began, Luke's Jedi were among the first to respond, and they defended planets, rescued civilians, and held the line. Their autonomy brought tension, however, and the Republic saw them as unreliable. For his part, Luke insisted they remain loyal to the Force, not to governments. In Legends, this order survived and evolved. In canon, the temple fell when Ben Solo turned. But in both timelines, Luke never stopped searching for knowledge, for perspective, for what the Jedi could become. Skywalkers of the Chiss. In the unknown regions, the Chiss ascendancy used the Force differently. Instead of building temples or teaching the light, they trained children called Skywalkers. Young Force sensitives, mostly girls, born with precognitive instincts known as third sight. These children could sense safe paths through unstable hyperspace, something no computer could match. They weren't taught Jedi ethics or Sith lore, and they weren't warriors. They were navigators. Skywalkers served aboard Chiss vessels under strict secrecy. Older caretakers, retired Skywalkers themselves, guided them until their powers faded, usually around age 14. Then they returned to ordinary life. The Chiss never treated this ability as mystical. It was just useful, and because these children weren't trained in combat or exposed to ambition, they never seemed to fall to darkness. They served quietly and then disappeared. It's a rare example of the Force completely used without dogma. Neither feared nor worshipped, just applied. The Knights of Ren. Where the Skywalkers served in silence, the Knights of Ren roared in chaos. They appeared after the fall of the Empire, force-wielding marauders who rejected Jedi discipline and Sith structure. Their only belief was the Ren, the name of the red-bladed weapon carried by their leader, and a philosophy of strength through destruction. While the Knights embraced the dark side, they didn't embrace its traditions. They had no code, no plan, and they fought for impulse, for dominance, and for themselves. Ben Solo joined them at his lowest. They gave him a name, Kylo Ren, and a place to burn everything that came before. For a time, he led them, but they never gave him peace, only noise. In the end, he turned against them to save Rey, and that rejection of the Ren was the first step back toward the light. The Knights are what happens when the Force is stripped of purpose, when power becomes the goal and nothing else remains. So what do you think of our list, and who's your favorite Jedi sect? Let us know all that and more in the comment section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.